I hope that you're ready for a busy offseason because, as ESPN believes, the Cincinnati Reds will be very busy.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. We are your daily source for all things Cincinnati Reds. I'm Stephen Offenbaker. He's Jeff Carr, and we have about 14 years of experience covering the Cincinnati Reds in podcasting form. We love the Reds. We love baseball. We love talking Reds. We love talking baseball. We've taken our love of the game, our love for the team. We've turned that into information for you. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, Jeff teased it there at the beginning. At least a few people think the Cincinnati Reds are going to be one of the busier small market teams. We'll explain all of the little nuances involved in that coming up here in just a couple minutes. We're also going to be talking about whether or not we think the Reds are close, whether or not we think they're a move or two away from winning the National League Central. We're going to get into that and your thoughts on that. We definitely want to hear from you in the comment section as we are live here on YouTube today. Appreciate you joining us live and participating with your questions and comments on this episode that's brought to you by Gametime. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and you could get $20 off your first purchase. Get started with Gametime today. All right, Jeff, here's where we're going to get started. We are going to get started with this breaking news. It's news to me that the Cincinnati Reds are going to be one of the more active small market teams. So obviously, when they say active, we're not saying they're going to be more active than the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Padres or, guys that have more than cabbage money. We are saying they'll be more active than, I don't know, the Pirates and the Royals and Lions and
the Cardinals and the Rays. And yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is that there was a caveat, and quite frankly, there's a character limit on YouTube titles, so I didn't have the small market team put into the title.
You're a troll.
Like,
you can
folks
just say
like Happy Hermit, who I know for a fact Happy Hermit is a Cubs fan, so he's hating on the fact that we're saying they're going to be.
Just fess up that you clickbaited. It's fine.
I did not, because ESPN said they would be most active. There were no lies. And when it comes to being a small market team is the qualifier, but this was said in the ESPN article. Now, the article was set up by saying that there were 18. It was a panel of 18 people that mixed of current MLB executives and current MLB insiders. And they said that the Reds showed up on this list as they were active last winter as well, and seemed to signal a desire to speed up their timeline for contending when they hired veteran manager Terry Francona in October. And one of the executives on the panel was quoted as saying, "I'll take the Reds just because of Tito. They're not that far off. One good hitter and pitcher puts them in the thick of the Central." And Steve, as we know, all you got to do is get into the race. So if you just need a hitter and you just need a pitcher, get into that playoff race by doing just that.
Let me ask you this, and I've seen this coming up more and more, Jeff, and I know we normally save the Q&A for the end, but this fits in this segment. So let's go here from Mystic Prod. Would love to talk about options through trade rather than free agency. Would the Reds have a shot to get players like Taylor Ward, George Springer, Brent Rooker? We talked a little bit about Rooker on our last show. Here's my take, Jeff, and you tell me if you disagree with this or you think I'm wrong, but at the end of the day, yeah, you can go out and get anybody. You can go out and fill any of these needs via trade. The question is, are you going to be willing to part with? And when I say you, is the fan base going to be willing to part with? Is the front office going to be willing to part with the prospect capital that it's going to require to trade and get these guys? Because if we're going to get a major league outfielder, you may have to trade a major league infielder. And I'm talking about you, Jonathan India lovers. You may have to start wrapping your head around the fact that somebody from the major league roster has to go to get somebody to the major league roster added in. And then also, if you're talking about minor league, if you wanted, the major league roster is off limits. Fine. Are we trading Chase Burns? Are we trading Chase Petty? Are we trading Duno? Are we trading Cam Collier? Those are the names. Those are where the conversations start when you start talking about trades for major league ready guys that you can plug and play. And I don't know that the front office has an appetite for that right now.
No, and I think their appetite is even less willing when you're talking about the prospect side of things. Like, I think if the trade, and it was reported that the Royals were discussing Brady Singer, the Reds were discussing Jonathan India, but that those two players specifically being involved in the deal meant that the deal wasn't close. I think if the trade was simply that, they would have already made it. That would have already happened. It's the fact that prospects are involved is a thing that the Reds are just not. They're very reticent to do that. I heard that word on another podcast the other day. That's why I decided to use it on this one. But
Alabama, Huntsville West, baby. It's undefeated.
But they really don't want to do that sort of thing. So as much as we could sit here and put together a trade package for a guy like Brent Rooker that involved guys like Chase Petty or Sal Stewart or Cam Collier or things like that, the Reds just don't seem to be wanting to do that sort of thing, especially on the Chase Petty side, because we've talked about this before, where the Reds fancy themselves to be a pitching machine, a pitching organization where they draft, develop, and trade for and develop from within their young pitchers that they can control for 5 to 6 years, and then they buy hitting and other stuff like that.
Zero Wave checking in saying it's time to cash in on the prospect capital the Reds have. They have 5 years to contend because of the control they have with Ellie. Prospects that won't be ready before then should be trade targets. I agree with this. I agree with this, Jeff. If the window is now, you and I have been talking since 2022 that the window is now. I totally agree with that take.
And I don't disagree with it either, but I'm going to say from Nick Krall's perspective, Nick Krall disagrees. Because Nick Krall has told us before that there is no such thing as windows. He doesn't want it to be a whole idea of, well, we only have so long to contend, so we're only going to go all in for this period. He wants to find a happy medium, and I think that's why he's gotten so much criticism, and he's gotten criticism from us for not going harder in trades and not going harder in free agency, and that is because he is looking at 2025 and how 2025 affects 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. It is, quite frankly, a job that I don't love. Like, to see the forest and the trees. He's not looking for the forest for the trees. He's looking for the forest and the trees. That's just a whole thought process. And the reason why general managers don't last that long, Steve, they've got so many other things that they've got to do. So while I disagree, and I do think you need to go as hard as you possibly can for the time that you have Ellie, because you're not going to have him any longer than you got him for, the Reds aren't looking at it that way.
One concern for me, though, Jeff, is if the Reds aren't looking at it that way, then they have to be willing to go out and buy some players. They have to be willing to spend the cabbage money. They have to be willing to do that.
All the puns intended on that one.
All the puns intended. So it boils us back to a starting pitcher, and it boils us back to, beat the drum, a right-handed, power-hitting outfielder. And that's the drum that you and I have been beating for a couple years now. And I think we're going to talk about this in the upcoming segment, but the national media seems to have finally listened to one of our shows.
Yes, because, and I mean, that's what they said in the ESPN blurb, is that the Reds are a pitcher and a hitter away from contending in the Central. And that's also kind of what they said, and we'll discuss that here in a few minutes on another website, although with a different angle in mind, the way that they're looking at the team. But that is why, and I kind of want to circle back to the ESPN report that the Reds will be one of the most active small market teams this offseason, is because that is why I'm excited about that report. It's not because they're going to be active in trades. They could make a few trades. And I think mostly it'll involve Jonathan India, and it's some pipe dream where it involves Jeimer Candelario. And it might be some other major league players, but it's not going to be prospects for major league players. Where they're going to be most active is in adding through free agency, and there's definitely options out there. But they don't have to go crazy with it. They don't have to buy a whole team. They need 2 big time additions in 2 key areas that are circled very heavily in a report that entering the offseason, and not really a report, a power rankings, if you will, because FanGraphs hates the Reds. Let's put it this way.
They do. They do.
The power
They're very
ranking.
anti. Keith Law.
Keith
Reds. Law is writing for FanGraphs, right? That's what's happened. Like Keith Law
he's
is
writing
doing
for the Athletic, but no, he hates the Reds too. That's a different site. But
that's
FanGraphs hates the Reds. They rank them very low in the offseason power rankings. We'll discuss why that is and what the Reds can do about it coming up next. We all love watching sports, and one of the other things we love about sports is making the right pick. And there's no better place that I love to make picks than over at FanDuel, because that's the best way to get some cash based on your sports knowledge. I use FanDuel all the time, whether it comes to football or basketball's going on. You got NHL, everything going on. Of course, off-season baseball as well. You got your baseball futures that you can jump in on, like the 60-1 odds for the Reds to win the World Series next year. Look, I get it. They shouldn't be favorites, but they shouldn't be ignored either. Terry Francona looks at that 60-1 and he says, hold my beer. Check out that over at FanDuel today. By the way, new users as well. If you win your first $5 bet, you can get $150 in bonus bets. That's over at FanDuel. They make it so easy to make your picks. You can find all the information on the game that you're watching and other games going on, all in the same place that you make your wagers. That's FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook of Locked On. We are talking Reds here today, all day, every week, every month, all year long, all throughout the offseason, getting you ready for a playoff year in 2025. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Reds to get at least 30 minutes of Reds talk in your feed every single day. All right, Steve, we're excited that there are reports that people think that the Reds will be active this offseason because there's another website, FanGraphs.com, which I love their information, by the way. I love all the info that FanGraphs has, the different statistics and projection systems, because quite frankly, all throughout the offseason, they fuel our love of the Reds by telling us how much they hate the Reds. And they surely hate the Reds when it comes to entering the offseason. They talked about power rankings and projected wins above replacement and all this other stuff when it comes to the current Reds roster for next year. And they have the Reds, drumroll please, 27th in Major League Baseball. Not pictured in this current graphic that I'm showing for the YouTube folks is the White Sox and the Royals. They are the worst 2 teams in baseball according to these power rankings. The Reds are only ahead of the Rockies, White Sox, and Nationals in this power ranking, Steve. My God.
It's really bad. And also, if you're listening and you can hear the yard work, I'm sorry. Bad timing, but it is what it is, and I can't get over there to close the windows.
There's no yard work when there's snow in the yard.
Oh, is there snow? What's that? I don't know what that is. Listen, the Reds have been hated by these sites like FanGraphs for a couple of years now, and I know you and I both took personal offense last year to the way the Reds were viewed, and turns out
that gummit, they were kind of right.
They were kind of correct.
That's beside the point.
So. It gives me pause in how much I want to rip FanGraphs. But, you know, if the Reds only win 76 games next year, listen, I think they're a much better team than that. But there are a lot of question marks. So if I were having to stake, you know, my job on producing a record, I would probably put them a little bit under where I think they truly are going to finish, because for them to get where I think they can be in the mid 80s for wins, there's a lot of hope as my strategy. I hope that all these guys bounce back. I hope that Ellie is fine. I hope. So I get it. The Reds are going to win more than 76 games, but I guess I can kind of understand where FanGraphs is coming from with this. Maybe I wouldn't have ranked them quite so low. I put that graphic.
Well,
back
and
up
that's
because,
why that, yeah,
because put that graphic back up for a second, because, you know, I look at this list. There is 0% chance that the Reds are worse than the Athletics. And there is 0% chance. Like, I know the Pirates have owned the Reds for the last couple years, but outside of Skeens Day, I'm not worried about the Pirates either. I think the Reds, just looking at the graphic, the Reds are going to have more wins than the Marlins. The Reds are going to have more wins than the Athletics, and the Reds are going to have more wins than the Pirates. So I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to panic with this, but also I kind of understand where they're coming from right now.
Well, and it's interesting because the reasons that you're giving the hope and all this other stuff are actually reasons that they cite as to why they have the Reds so far down there. The blurb that they talk about the Reds is that they say there's plenty of young talent in Cincinnati, but that's been true for years now, and the Reds still haven't figured out a way to turn the corner. Perhaps the addition of new manager Terry Francona will help this roster coalesce into a winner, because this team is so loaded with internal options who move through the farm system, it'll be a hard sell to displace any of them with external additions. Any improvement in 2025 will likely need to come in the form of breakouts and bounce backs from their youngsters. So really, you guys are saying the same thing, except for one thing.
No, we're not, because both
There's
things
only
are
one
true.
difference in there.
No, both things are true. Like, yeah, we're counting on bounce backs. We're counting on continued player development. I take issue with that's been true for years of the young talent. A season and a half is not years. And last year, everybody was hurt. So
but
I take
Steve,
issue
everybody
with that.
was really excited about Asher Wojciechowski. I mean, come on now.
Stop. And displace who? They're going to go sign a right-handed outfield power bat, and we're going to be pissed off because it displaced Stuart Fairchild? Give me a break. We're going to sign a starting pitcher that's reliable, that can make 30 starts, and it's going to displace the freaking bullpen day?
I don't think it actually, displace it. Signing a starting pitcher doesn't displace anybody, because the Reds have proved over the last couple of years that they need more than five.
The two moves that this team has to make, the right-handed power hitting outfield bat and a 30 starting pitcher, both of those moves displace absolutely nobody. And they're the missing pieces to go along with so FanGraphs was almost there. They almost managed to make a reasonable breakdown of this team, except that they tripped at the finish line, because the finish line is those two moves, accentuate what's missing. It fills the need, it bridges the gap, and it gets this team into true competition level. It doesn't displace anybody. It doesn't disrupt. It doesn't cause them to fall short. It's actually the thing that gets them over the finish line.
Because if you sign a 30 starting pitcher, sure, Rhett Lauder begins the year in AAA, but that might be the best thing for him. And then you only expect 20 starts out of him instead of, needing 25.
Because people aren't doing the math on what you're talking about. And I wanted to say this when we talked about this in the last show, and then we got onto something else and I didn't, because you gave a great list of what you were expecting in starts from the starters. And you had Hunter Green at like 27. Well, that leaves him 5 short of the season max of 32. Then you talk about the next guy in the rotation. Let's call it Nick Martinez. We expect what out of him? Maybe the same 25 to 28 starts.
Him to, at least 25.
That's another 5. That's 10 unfilled starts. And you get to Andrew Abbott. He's not starting 32 either. He may get you 25. You start adding those numbers up and they equal another starting pitcher. So when we say Rhett Lauder to AAA, you're talking about the first 2 weeks of the season. You're talking about the first month of the season. And then he's got to come up and spot start. He's got to come up because you have to be strategic and skip turns for Hunter Green and skip turns for Andrew Abbott and skip turns for everybody else, so that they're all still available for the playoffs that you hope you make it to. So you have to be strategic. So they need another starting pitcher.
And then on the hitting side of things, if you sign a power hitting right field or right-handed outfield bat, then you would ideally put him in the cleanup spot, which means that Tyler Stevenson then hits 3rd or 5th, and then Ellie hits 3rd or 5th or 2nd or 6th, or I would still think he'd be in the top 4 spots on the lineup somewhere. And then you'd have Spencer Steer, in a good spot. You move these guys out of pressure-packed situations because you bring in a legitimate veteran cleanup style hitter. And you don't have to force these other young guys that are still coming into their own to be like, okay, by the way, you need to be our key RBI guy. And then maybe Candelario, if he's not traded for a player to be named later and getting rid of his contract, then he can be in the middle of the lineup to help that too. There's so many different things that involve in just one move. You don't have to make a ton of moves, and that's kind of why I'm very glad that we're doing this live with everybody here. I appreciate anybody that's in the chat right now, because I'm curious. Do you believe that the Reds need wholesale changes to get to where we believe they can get to? Because we have said that for years. We don't believe that that's where they will be at this point heading into 2025, because we said playoff window begins 2024-2025. So if you say that they need wholesale changes, you're saying that we're wrong. And I'd be curious to know of your reasoning behind that, because I see two moves, legit moves, making this team exactly what we need them to be. And then, yes, the other part of what FanGraphs said, the breakouts and the bounce backs, they need breakouts and bounce backs. They can't have the same year from Spencer Steer. They can't have the same year from Noelvi Marte and Christian Encarnacion Strand, because if you do that, then there's a lot more holes on this team. But I'm expecting those guys to get better.
Yeah, because if you get Matt McLain back and healthy and performing like we think he will, I mean, can you imagine starting every game, Jeff, with a first four that goes Matt McLain, Ellie De La Cruz, Spencer Steer, and Mr. Outside Higher power hitting right-handed outfielder? As your, I don't know if you can fit all that on the batting lineup, writing that in the number 4 spot. But yeah, but 1 through 4, that's pretty fierce way to start every single baseball game. I'm just saying.
And that's what they missed. They missed the lineup that other pitchers feared last year. Yeah, I mean, Ellie De La Cruz did his thing, and every so often Tyler Stevenson did his thing. But for the most part, there was nobody in this lineup that other pitchers feared. If they can set that up, if they can get that back, then we are talking about a team that can contend for the division and contend for a nice little playoff run in there.
All right, Jeff, you kind of threw down the gauntlet there for the comment section, whether or not people want to be total rebuild, wholesale changes, trade everybody away to get other people. I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of people that are in that lane, but there may be some people in that lane. If you're in that lane, definitely get it in the chat, because coming up, we are going to start with your questions and comments as we continue on this live show here on a lovely, snowy, I guess, I'm told, in Cincinnati, Thursday afternoon. We're going to get to your questions and comments right after this. If you haven't done so yet, please click the like button down there somewhere. Click the subscribe button, click the notification bell. And if you can't listen to us live or you can't watch us on YouTube, make sure you find us in your favorite podcasting audio feed. Take us in the car with you. Take us to the gym. Don't fall off the rowing machine like Jeff Carr does, but take us with you. You can listen to us wherever you are. If for some reason you use a podcasting app that we're not on, I don't think there's any left that we're not on, but if we're not on one, let us know. We'll try and get on it for you. All right, Jeff, let's start into this questions and comments. A lot of folks in the chat here, and I love it. It's my favorite part of these live shows. If you got something up top there that you wanted to talk about, probably be easier if you just put it back in the chat again, because that's a lot of scrolling to get back up there. You guys have been pretty active in your talks, but let's talk a little bit about the bounce backs. And man, the weed eater is loud. I don't know if you guys can hear that. I'm sorry. We had a chat while you were away, me and Tim Daniel, talking about the Reds making a trade with the White Sox. And I'd kind of like you to weigh in on it. This from Zero Wave. What even would get Luis Robert for just prospects? Who would you be willing to trade away to do this? And would you be willing to make this deal? This is who Tim Daniel said, go get. As far as a trade option versus a free agent signing.
Yeah. I would love it, because he would play center field, and then you could tell TJ Friedel you can play right field. You know, you don't have to be our main guy in the outfield defensively, because Luis Robert would be that guy. And then you would be able to slot him in the middle of the lineup. I don't know that he's a cleanup guy. That's the only
right.
I don't know that would count me out of this idea, though. The thing that would count me out of this idea is, what is the parameters of the trade? Because you would definitely need to put Jonathan India in this trade. And then even that, you would still probably. And
that's from the Reds' perspective, right? Because I don't think you could do it for just prospects, right?
No, if you did it for just prospects, you're talking about Chase Petty, South Stewart, and Cam Collier, and then we still got to add more to it. Like, you're not getting Luis Robert. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, if it's just prospects. So you got to put in India. Maybe you throw in like an Emilio Pagan to see if you can bolster the bullpen a little bit, and then add money to what you would need to pay. I think Luis Robert is under team control for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think he has 2 more years of team control.
So that's kind of nice. But I just think that would be too expensive of a trade. Okay, so here's the thing. All right. Confirmation on his contract situation. He is under contract for 2025 for $15 million. He has two club options, a club option for 2026 and a club option for 2027, which would mean that the Reds have ultimate control of over how long they have him, is 28 and 29 years, but they're for $20 million apiece. So you would actually need to clear some money here, assuming that the Reds stick to about $100 to $105 million for their payroll for next season. And then on top of that, in years after this, how much are you going to be able to give him for 2026, for 2027, things like that, while also signing some guys long-term, which they need to do. That's going to be the tough part for me. I think it's a no-go. I think this doesn't fit for the Reds, not on a roster basis, but on a financial basis in what it would take to acquire him from the White Sox. It would just be too much.
Let's stay in the outfield lane a little bit. Our buddy Josh, Josh has been a loyal long timer around here, says he sent you a DM with his plan, but I bring this up to specifically talk about the last part of this, Jeff, because you and I talked about this during prep and we're at completely opposite ends of what we think should happen. Do you want to make a case here or?
So Michael Conforto is interesting depending on how close Spot Track, and we love using spottrack.com, SPOTRAC.com, during the offseason when it comes to free agent tracking, when it comes to how much guys are making in arbitration, all this other stuff. It's a very good resource. But suffice it to say, spottrack.com is estimating that Michael Conforto, his contract would only be like $4.7 million per year. And if that's the case, do it yesterday. Now, it's interesting. He's not a right-handed power hitting guy. He's a left-handed power hitting guy in the outfield. And to your head shaking and to our pre-show conversations point, he has reverse splits. He actually hits lefties better than he hits righties. So there's an interesting point to be made about Michael Conforto. He's not a guy that we have discussed up to this point in the offseason. And I know Josh, to his point, mentioned him in the DM. I've seen some other folks talking about him. Clay Snowden talked about him in a piece he wrote for justbaseball.com and things like that. I would be in on this if the money is anywhere close to $4.7 million, because that means he's making less than Hunter Green and Jonathan India next year.
I don't like this move. I don't like, and listen, I know you instantly jumped on and were yelling at me about splits and reverse splits and all these things. At the end of the day, left-handed major league pitching will figure that crap out. And I just don't trust it.
Such a leftist.
It needs to be a right-handed guy, Jeff, for lineup construction, for consistency, it's not going to get any easier for left-handed batters to hit left-handed pitchers. I don't like
love
it.
The left right thing like David Bell does.
I hope not. I think
David Bell was married to that idea.
I think if David Bell was all in on any particular kind of a managing move, Terry Francona is going to be the opposite of that. Because Terry Francona knows how to win. But I don't like this. I feel like this is not, I don't want to go out and get a souped up TJ Friedel. I want a right-handed power hitting bat that you can reliably run out there for 150 games. And I don't want to have a guy that may run into some struggles and now you're playing frickin' Stuart Fairchild again or whatever. I don't want to do that. If they're going to fix it, go fix it. Spend the money and get a guy that can hit lefties and is going to continue to hit lefties. And you're not going to have a slump. You're not going to have a problem with the lefties. That's the problem. So if you're going to fix it. Go get a right-hander.
So let's do this. And I know Josh didn't mention this in his comment, but this is a guy that I've been thinking about a lot because he vibes more with things that we've been hearing the front office say and not with things that we have been saying, where we have said power hitter, power hitter, power hitter, power hitter, power hitter. Jurickson Profar is out there. Now, Jurickson Profar is no slouch. He's not a singles hitter only, but he's also not a power hitter in the traditional sense. This past year was the best year of his career. He cashed in beautifully, bet on himself, 1-year deal with the Padres. Now he's a free agent. And Spot Track has him making around $12 to $13 million a year on his next free agent deal. For that kind of a money, and Michael Blackman saying yes on Profar, Jurickson Profar could be a guy that you slot into your leadoff spot and feel really, really good about him because he has shown, at least last year. Last year, he had no splits whatsoever, actually hit better against lefties than he did against righties. And he hit around 300 against both sides of the plate.
Josh says, to be fair, he went this way because he didn't think Santander or even Tyler O'Neill were necessarily viable options. Josh, I'm going to assume you're talking about money versus guys that the Reds should even look at. I assume you're talking about money. And I don't know that I don't think, Jeff and I, we were talking about Tyler O'Neill. I think he's definitely in the Reds money range. I don't see him being cost prohibitive. I just think he's the next tier down of available free agents, right?
Well, it's interesting because Spot Track actually has him very comparable to what Santander is going to make. Although they are much lower on Santander than what I think both of us, because I think you're more so in the camp that he's definitely making more than 20 million. I think he probably makes around 20 million, could see 19. But
If
Spot Track only has Santander at 17.7.
If Anthony Santander signs a contract that's less than $22 million a year, less than, let's say 3 years, $22 million. If that's what gets him done, Nick Krall needs to be flying to wherever Anthony Santander is right now and putting him on a plane. That's how that needs
driving him here. Yeah, right. No, I'm with you on that because that's kind of where we think it would be cost prohibitive for the Reds. Like, I don't know, and I think it's just simply because they haven't had any sort of national recognition, because they haven't done anything worth being nationally recognized for. But until the Reds can actually show that they have the sort of chops to be in the playoffs, move within the playoffs, and get that sort of success, they're not going to be able to afford two players making over $20 million a year. That's what they're telling us. And I feel like until that happens, Nick Martinez is going to be the only player that makes over $20 million for this team this year.
Okay, well, let's lean into that a little bit. And then let's also look at what Nick Krall has told us. Because Ricky Young is another yes to Profar. And what Nick Krall has told us is they don't need power. They don't need to go out and spend money and get a power bat. And I think I still can't wrap my head around that. And we both had a lot of time to think about this now.
Last year. Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I grew up on small ball. I love small ball. I love get them on, steal a base, get them over, get them in, do the things. Tony Gwynn to the 6.5 hole. I love that stuff. But there is some truth to those baseball newists versus purists. That's something I made up. Those baseball newists that are
called modern baseball fans. You don't
those
have to
baseball
make up a term.
newists. Those guys that don't like baseball, so they're trying to change baseball. Those are the guys I'm talking about. The Manfred lovers of the world. I think that's what I'm talking about. But those guys, there may be something to their argument that you do need a dude or two in your lineup that can change a game with a swing of a bat. Your Freddie Freeman winning game one of the World Series for you. Your guy.
Game one, he won like the whole World Series for the Dodgers.
Yeah, he kind of did, didn't he? Boy, those Atlanta Braves fans are salty,
yeah, the
man.
Grand Slam in game one. The Grand Slam in game
those
one.
Atlanta Braves fans are hurting still. But, I mean, you do need a guy. And I think there's something to that argument. So for Nick Krall to come out, being the president of baseball operations for a team that plays in a ballpark that is just screaming for a power hitting guy in the middle of the lineup, it's counterintuitive to me. And the same team that goes out and gets a Tito Francona goes out and pays Terry to come out of retirement. And I mean, I'm not saying that Francona is an old dude that's I don't know what to make of this. And maybe you can help me understand it.
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because for the last couple of years in his tenure in Cleveland, they were not a power hitting team. They had Jose Ramirez, and he's one of the 5 best players in all of baseball, so obviously he hit home runs. But for the majority of that lineup, it was get him on, get him over, get him in. It was high average guys like Steve Kwan, not even as high as him because he hits really high average, but you had high average guys that got on base a lot really well and just hit line drives. And that was with Chris Valleca. The Reds have basically put that formula together in Cincinnati now. And I think that's why Nick Krall is saying that. If they do get a power hitter, it will be a bit more of a surprise. And I think that Terry Francona has told them he doesn't need a Teoscar Hernandez. But quite frankly, you bring Teoscar Hernandez, or as Mike Graham points out, a Juan Soto, into Cincinnati, they're going to hit like 40 bombs. Easy. They're going to roll out of bed with 40 bombs. And I don't know why we don't want that, because we saw Adam Dunn do that, and this lineup was amazing when Adam Dunn was a part of it. So I really want to see more of that. God, if we had prime Adam Dunn in this lineup, can you imagine?
There's your answer. That's why. Debbie Brown for the win, because the owners are cheap.
But I mean, I
will say this.
I'll push back.
Can they win if they sign Profar? I don't know, but that's what they do. They get a guy, a leadoff guy, a slap hitter, a doubles hitter. Can they small ball their way to win the division?
Then I go back to what FanGraphs said about bounce backs and breakouts. And does CES do it? Because CES has the profile that he can. That's the only thing that we are discounting where it comes to we are begging for power, is that we are forgetting that the profile around CES is that he is a cleanup hitter. And while it's a hope and it's not a strategy, I understand that. His profile and his scouting profile have said that is who he could be. And there's probably an aspect where the Reds are thinking, we got our guy. And as long as he's healthy, he'll be that guy. And so we don't necessarily need to go get another one of those guys, because we already got our guy who can hit fourth. So that is the argument that I could see the Reds making to our constant pleas. That's not changing my plea. I would rather them have Teoscar Hernandez and then CES breaks out and then you got 240 homer guys. But I don't want to see another season where CES gets hit on the hand and now we have no cleanup guys. So that's really where I am coming from my analysis with this. But I do see what the Reds are saying, and that they believe they already have their cleanup hitter in-house, so long as he breaks out to where the scouting profile had him.
Oh, hope as a strategy really just gives me heartburn. Let's do this from Carrie.
Welcome to Cincinnati.
CES and Maddie, talking about Matt McLain, did well in the Arizona Fall League.
Well,
yeah.
and well is relative for these guys, right?
Well
is they were healthy.
CES did well.
That's what we wanted. Yeah.
CES did well when he didn't have scar tissue setback. Okay.
Right.
Which
is good he's having that now and not in February.
Yeah. Matt McLain did well against pitching that he should really do well against. Here's my takeaway from Matt McLain's performance in the Arizona Fall League. I'm happy with what I saw. I'm happy that he was able to play and do as well as he did. I'm concerned by his own reports that when he played back-to-back days, he still felt discomfort and pain in that shoulder. That concerns me a little bit. But I'm also cautiously optimistic because I know that part of his rehab plan, part of his rehab team, and part of the work that he's doing, everyone was on the same page. That's normal. That's what's going to happen. And at about the 1 year mark, that should stop. Well, the 1 year mark is deep into spring training. So I'm cautiously optimistic about Matt McLain that we're going to get to opening day. That shoulder is going to be top shape 100%, and we can progress forward with Matt McLain. I don't know anything about CES, and I don't think you know anything about CES. I don't think anybody knows anything about CES, because that scar tissue, is that going to be a lingering scar tissue problem? Is it going to be something that he works through and forgets about, we don't know. And the only way we're going to know is for him to take major league at bats. And I'm not talking about fall league at bats. I'm not talking about spring training at bats. I'm talking about opening day in Cincinnati and beyond. What does his wrist feel like after he goes out there and plays with the adrenaline rush of facing major league pitching in major league games that matter? We don't know. We don't know.
And that's because the only thing that I have in my brain about CES right now is all of the different things that David Bell said, that basically CES needs a new hand a la Luke Skywalker. So I don't know exactly what we're going to get from him. So I don't want to bet that he is going to A, be healthy, and B, take that jump.
Here's the hot take of the day. I'm not counting on him playing.
You don't think he's going to be on the opening day roster?
Well, listen, if he does, it's icing. It's gravy.
Yeah.
It's bonus. It's whatever. I want heading into right now. If I'm constructing this thing, they sign a freaking outfielder and Spencer Steer's playing first base. That's what I'm doing.
Mm.
And if you trade Jonathan India and you got to play Spencer Steer at second base, somebody else is playing first base. Jamer Candelario is probably okay.
Candelario, yeah.
So
I'm
not counting on him there at all.
As much as I'd love to say that the Reds will clear that $15 million in money that Candelario is owed next year, I don't think that's going to happen. So he's going to be on this roster. And that's where I'm at with that too, is that, you've got Noelvi Marte who's starting to look good in some of the Winter League stuff. That doesn't make me feel like he's going to look good on opening day. He's got to prove that in the majors, but he started to turn the corner a little bit there in the final month of last year. I'm hopeful that means he will turn the corner next season at third base as well. So coming back on the CES and the Matt McLain of it all I wanted to see from Arizona, though, was that they are healthy. And the fact that he's dealing with scar tissue doesn't mean that he's unhealthy. But I also am not sitting here penciling him into the opening day lineup, batting fourth and playing first base.
Yeah, I'm much more if we're going to use Arizona as an eye test, which that sounds kind of like what you said. If we're going to use Arizona as an eye test,
that's all it was for me.
I saw enough from Matt McLain to reliably say he'll be there on opening day. I did not see enough from CES for me to be willing to pencil him in.
Which, quick aside, speaking of eye test in Arizona, I'm in on Luis May. Luis May just being added to the 40-man roster to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. He's 23 years old. He'll 23. Be in Louisville pretty early on this season. He might start in Louisville. He could start in Chattanooga, then make his way up to Louisville after a couple of weeks. But I think at some point this season, probably around June or July, we'll see him in the major leagues. Triple-digit fastball, man. Like, sign me up for that. This Reds bullpen, as good as it was in most spots last year until it was told to be the starting pitcher every fifth day and it just burnt itself out. It doesn't really have that power guy like that to really come out and blow your socks off with a fastball. Luis May could be that guy, and there are some scouts that are saying in a year or two, if he gets the walks under control, he could be the closer. So you've got Graham Ashcraft as a possibility. You got Alexis Diaz, obviously the incumbent, and you've got the dark horse in Luis May, who could be your closers in the next couple of years. So I just want to take that aside on the Arizona conversation. Yeah, let's
make a mental note to get Tom Nichols in here and have a chat about Luis May. That'd be a fun talk. Debbie Brown with this, and this is where I want to go next from the folks in the comment section. Debbie Brown thinks the reason to keep Jonathan India are all of these question marks that really mostly went unanswered in the Arizona Fall League. Is Matt McLain going to be able to play back-to-back days without pain? Is CES going to be able to play at all, depending on how that wrist responds to everyday use? That's why you keep a Jonathan India. Are you there? Do they have to? Do they have to keep Jonathan India in order to have an insurance policy?
I don't think so.
I don't either. I think if you find the right deal for Jonathan India, whether it's for a starting pitcher or for an outfielder, you have to take it. I think you have to make that move.
I wonder a little bit because there is a deadline coming up Friday afternoon, the non-tender deadline. And that is, if you are not going to sign a guy who's arbitration eligible, the deadline to wave goodbye to him is Friday afternoon. Could we see a Jonathan India trade between now and then? Because Santiago Espinal is your Jonathan India insurance. I've gotten some takes from friends of the podcast like Crazy and some other folks that have said they'd rather have Santiago Espinal than Jonathan India. And I kind of feel like if you're going to non-tender Santiago Espinal, then you're not going to trade Jonathan India. So I think they will do their darndest to see if they trade him before Friday.
That's an interesting take. I think regardless of what happens with Jonathan India, Espinal's on this team. And you and I don't often disagree, but this is where you and I really disagree of what they should do. I see the value in, if you're going to keep somebody as insurance, if you're going to stash somebody, it's not Jonathan India who can bring you value. And if you get a deal after the season that he had, you take that deal. The guy you stash, the insurance policy, is a guy like Espinal, who honestly is not going to be that great. He's going to give you flashes. He's going to give you moments. And we saw that from him. But what we know is he can play all over the field, and he could be a placeholder while you figure out the next move. So if any of those guys aren't ready, Espinal's kind of the guy I think you keep around.
There's another part of this, and it's a part that I think you and I both agree shouldn't be as big of a conversation as it is. But I want to put this to you because we have constantly said we don't think Edwin Arroyo sees Major League playing time this year, 2025. Yep. We think we see him in 2026.
Yep.
I constantly, anytime I'm reading something from Mark Sheldon or reading something from Gordon Whitmire, the reporters are talking about Edwin Arroyo and what his effect on this roster will be. They're not talking about him just out of the blue. They're not making up reasons to talk about Edwin Arroyo. They're talking about him because the team is talking about him. If Edwin Arroyo has a good spring, is he the reason that you don't have either India or Espinal on this team because he plays shortstop, Ellie moves to third, and then you've got Noelvi Marte who can play anywhere on the infield and depth like that?
This team talked a lot about Nick Senzel. No, you don't. You're not gonna do that. We have no idea what he's going to be able to do. Right. He hasn't hit against pitchers that are maybe major leaguers in over a year. He's going to start the season in Double-A. If he does well through May or June, he's going to move up to Triple-A. If he sees the major league roster, it's because disaster struck and Ellie is unavailable. That's the only way you might see him pressed into service. No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
It's an interesting thing for me because I get the feeling, and there's one other question that I have, and this is a little bit aside from what we're talking about, and it sort of segues into a different point that I want to make. But when it comes to Santiago Espinal, I think at this time of year, you're more apt to look at the number than where he fits on this roster, because you look at the number being around 3.6 million, possibly up to 4, maybe as low as 3, but it's somewhere between 3 and 4. Is that money better served in a long-term contract for Tyler Stevenson? Is it better served being added to a contract for an outfielder or for a starting pitcher? Or is it better served as Matt McLean insurance?
I don't know why it has to be only one of those things. Bob, if you're watching, Bob, doesn't have to be just one of those things. Phil, damn it. It can be all of those things. Is it better served? Well, it's better served with a starter. It's better served. I mean, Tyler Stevenson getting an extension should be priority number one. There was a comment in the chat there way back, and I'm not going to try and go find it, but basically it said with, backup catchers being signed left and right, what are the Reds doing? Who are they going to get? There's Tyler and nobody else. Right. Quite literally.
On this organization.
There's not a backup. There's not a
bottom.
guy coming. I mean, you got to go way down the food chain before you find the next true catching prospect right now. So the Reds absolutely have to give Tyler Stevenson some kind of a deal. It needs to happen. Beyond that, maybe we can sign a backup catcher. Like, could we get a backup catcher? Hello?
Yeah.
Bob, sign a backup catcher. Because I am concerned about that. And the reason that concerns me is more so than any other place on the field. Thanks for going and finding that. John was the guy that had that comment. More than anybody else on the field, the backup catcher is going to play because Tyler Stevenson's not starting back-to-back games, night game, day game. They don't do that. Tyler Stevenson is going to have load management going on to keep him healthy, protect his legs. That guy's going to play. So you can't wait until spring training and be like, well, let's see what the waiver wire presents to us. You can't do that. You got to go get somebody.
I did see that Jacob Stallings is already off the board. He went back to Colorado, which is where he played last year. So I think there might have just been an element that he didn't want to go anywhere else. But yeah, I mean, there's key options that you and I talked about a little bit. And while we didn't go crazy, we're like, I don't think you have to go crazy with who the backup catcher is, but you definitely want a viable backup. You don't want to be stuck with, well, Tucker Barnhart didn't retire, so he'll be our backup. Like, as much as I love Tucker, he hadn't been that guy in a long time. So what do the Reds end up doing with that position? They absolutely have to lock up Tyler Stevenson because the closest prospect to being like exciting is Alfredo Duno, and he certainly is like nowhere close. He's that old. Come on, he's 19. All right, but listen, that being said, he's nowhere close to major leagues.
If you can't buy beer, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a stretch to get you to the majors this year. I mean, maybe a few rare exceptions throughout baseball, but for the most part, that's kind of a guiding principle.
But that's the point, though, is that the organization is beholden to Tyler Stevenson when it comes to catching. Otherwise, you have to rebuild that entire position, and they don't want to do that. They shouldn't want to do that. They should want to keep him. But that's kind of so. The Espinal point was a segue for me because this non-tender deadline presents the Reds with a question. Because this point in the year, not during the season, not spring training, off-season. Off-season is about the number. What does the team get out of a certain guy making a certain amount of money? The team is definitely getting more than $4.4 million from Tyler Stevenson. The team is definitely getting more than $2.6 million out of Alexis Diaz. They're definitely getting more out of the number for Nick Lodolo and Sam Moll. But there's a big question around Espinal at 3.6, which we've already discussed. We're not going to go crazy deep into that one. And also Jake Fraley at 2.8. Who is Jake Fraley? Because we saw the power in 2023. We saw the average in 2024. We haven't seen them both. Defensively, I think he's fine. I don't think he's bad, but I don't think he's good either. I don't think he's a plus defender, a guy that you're like, our outfield defense is set as long as he's playing. But he is definitely going to get more playing time next year because Will Benson should be in AAA. He should not be on this Major League roster. So what do you view Jake Fraley as? Because if he is definitely on this Major League roster, he's making $2.8 million that could be going somewhere else.
I keep him for that money, and in my mind, he's the left-handed half of a platoon, and you play him accordingly. He gets the at-bats that Will Benson was getting. Who you partner him with, it better not be Stuart Fairchild. What I would much rather see is him actually, and hear me out, comment section, before you blow up. I would like him to platoon with Spencer Steer. And not that I want Spencer Steer out of the lineup, but against right-handed pitching, I would like Spencer Steer on the infield. And I would like Jake Fraley in the outfield. And then when Fraley sits, you move Steer back to the outfield. So when Fraley's in, Steer can play some second base, especially if you want to give Matt McLean just DH time. So that, to protect his shoulder a little bit. Spencer Steer can play some first base for you, depending on what's going on. So that's how I would handle Jake Fraley. I think that's reasonable. And again, baseball money is not real because what other world is $2 million. And we're like, yeah, that's really reasonable, Jeff. That's a good amount of money. It's like, So that's how I would
monopoly.
That's how I would handle it. This is a good question. I think you know the answer to this because we've talked about it a little bit. Is Tito a platoon manager? I think there towards the end at Cleveland, Tito leaned into a lot of baseball trends, right? He was platooning guys. As you mentioned, he didn't have a ton of power hitters on his teams. I think the reason that Tito is a good fit in Cincinnati is because what he does is he relates to the players that he has, and he knows how to use them and get the most out of them. So I think if Tito needs to be a platoon manager, Tito will be a platoon manager. And if the outfield makeup that Nick Krall gives him, God help us, requires it, that's what he's going to do. I hope the right-handed side of that's better than Stuart Fairchild. Hope the right-handed side of that's better than, Dunn or whatever. Dunn's left-handed, but it needs to be better.
But that's what, and I get what you're saying, because we kind of walked through the 10 different outfielders that are currently on the 40-man roster on yesterday's episode. And there's only 3 of them that we really want to see any playing time from whatsoever. And Jake Fraley was one of those 3.
Yep.
But there are 7 other guys that just have so many question marks surrounding them and what they can bring to the table that it's tough for me. And that also kind of plays a little bit into a conversation I saw some other folks having on social media and different spaces and blogospheres and all this other stuff about a prospect named George Valera from the Cleveland Guardians. He got DFA'd the other day. He's an outfield prospect, former top 100 prospect, but there's no real track record in the major leagues. He's dealing with an ACL injury, things like that. I don't want guys like that. I want guys who are proven. Bring a guy in here who we know the Reds can rely on. That's who they need to be focused on, whether it be through trade or through free agent acquisitions, because I feel like for the last 10 years, the majority of the Reds acquisitions have been Will Benson type guys, where they show flashes, or they show talent, or they have talent. They have some sort of toolsiness about them in the minor leagues, but we don't know what they can offer at the major league level. And the Reds bring those guys in to see what they can do. And for the most part, they've done what Will Benson has done, where there's moments of greatness, but consistency is gone. There is no consistency whatsoever. They need guys that have that consistency. And when I'm looking at this outfield, and whether it be for a right-handed platoon for Jake Fraley, an everyday outfielder, whatever it is, it needs to be somebody who's done it and somebody who has that experience. And so that's where I kind of look at this non-tender deadline as an opportunity to revisit some of the numbers. And there's definitely been some folks that have posited ideas, and actually part of Josh, he had mentioned that he messaged me an off-season plan. Part of his off-season plan included trading a guy like Emilio Pagan away to save some money and things like that. That's where the Reds really have to be honest with themselves. If there's a market for a guy, can they use that money better elsewhere? Because they need consistency. They need proven talent in the areas that they need. And there's not that many of them, because for the most part, this team is going to be made up of young players that are still proving it, and they can't continue to add prove-it guys.
I want to finish up the outfield talk here with this from Zero. The general consensus of the chat is that Benson should be in Louisville on opening day. We agree with that. What is the path for him, either back to MLB or off the Reds roster? I'm ready to call Will Benson a 4A player. And I don't know if you're there or not, Jeff, because, they sent him down after his struggles, and he did well in Louisville. They brought him back. He had moments, and then last year he was just terrible all the way around. So I don't know that I care at all what he does if they send him to Louisville. I don't think any of his performance in Louisville matters. I think the only way we see him back in Cincinnati is if injuries force the move. And then and only then do I care how he does. And if he can show us something different and find a way to stick, fine. But I think he's a 4A player.
I think what he can show in AAA is his strikeout to walk ratio. And does he have any defensive highlights? What does he do with his arm? How does he make plays in the outfield? Because this team has so many guys that we're like, okay, well, if you just squint really hard and don't look at his defense, then he's a value to the lineup or something like that. We have too many guys like that. Can he provide value on the defensive side? We know that he's a good base runner. It's just he's got to get on base. So how does the strikeout to walk ratio look like? And what are the highlights on the fielding side of things? But mostly what he has in his path back to major league, back to the major leagues and being a consistent major league ball player is what does he do when he gets his shot next year? Because if he comes up and he's a 1 out of every 4 type of guy, and he's striking out more than he's getting hit, or, he's striking out a lot more than he's getting hits, striking out more than he's walking, things like that, then I'm going to have a hard time saying that he deserves a spot on this roster consistently, because he's going to be here whenever injuries happen. He is a good depth guy to have in your organization. But in order to be a everyday major league ball player like we hoped he could be at the start of last year, he's really got to show the ability to control the strikeout rate and to be an asset, not just a guy, not just somebody they stood out in right field, but to be an asset with the glove.
All right. As we round third and head for home, I want to talk about third base for just a minute. This from the chat. Daryl says, I think you're overestimating Marte. Now, he was talking to the chat group. He was talking to conversations that were going on in the chat about where Marte plays. Ali over there had said, could see Marte needs to clean up his hitting. I think if we are willing to say we can't count on CES, we can't count on Matt McLain, that they both have to show us, then I think it's only fair to say we can't count on Noelvi Marte. I'm of a mind right now that Jeimer Candelario is the opening day third baseman. I'm of a mind right now that unless Noelvi does something in spring that just blows our doors off, that he may need to start the season in Louisville with Will Benson. And the difference there is if he goes to Louisville and gets hot and shows us he's that guy that we kind of were hoping and thought maybe he would be, then you bring him up and you put him in. But what was his OPS plus? 46 during his time last year. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was in the 40s. So I don't know that that's my opening day guy at third base, Jeff. I mean, if we're being fair and we're willing to say CES maybe is not the opening day guy, if we're willing to say Matt McLain is a big question mark and we're not sure, how can we say that Noelvi Marte is the third baseman?
Well, one of Noelvi Marte or CES has to start. I don't think there's a world
that's not necessarily true. You start Candelario at third and you have Spencer Steer at first, and you've either signed Mr. Outside Hire or, God help us, Fraley Fairchild is your corner outfielder.
Yeah, but I'd rather have Marte starting than Fairchild.
Well, what's the difference?
I know that Marte can hit.
Baseball Reference says differently right now.
It's going to be a right-handed pitcher on opening day. I don't think the Giants have, because it'll be Logan Webb. Logan Webb's right-handed, right?
Well, then you would have Fraley with Spencer Steer at first base. I'm just saying, if we're going to be fair, fair is fair. You can't take Noelvi Marte's performance and say he's your opening day third baseman.
Okay, but there's fairness when it comes to analysis, and there's reality when it comes to the roster. You cannot realistically bench CES and Noelvi Marte and then expect this team to be a playoff team. One of those guys has to bounce back. Both of those guys have to be viable major leaguers for this team to be a playoff team. They cannot be 4A guys. And Jeimer Candelario gets 162 games because he's going to get hurt. And then Spencer Steer is going to play 162 games at first base because the outfield's not going to be that solid of a group. Spencer Steer is going to have to play left field at some point. So CES is going to have to play first base, or Noelvi Marte is going to have to play third base, and Candelario is going to have to be at first.
What if this is true? Michael Blackman says, unfortunately, I wonder if Marte's 23 season was tainted by steroids.
But I'm also not counting on those numbers. I'm still looking at his scouting profile. His scouting profile was as one of the top prospects in baseball with great power and great speed. or a great power and good speed and pretty decent hitting. I don't look at 23 and say that's who he is, because he barely played in 23. I think he only got like 30 games or something like that. So I'm not saying that I know anything about Noelvi Marte based on his first cup of coffee in the major leagues. And I'm also not saying that I'm out on him based on what I saw from last year, because the sample size is still not big enough.
From another Jeff, Jonathan India came up through the system as a third baseman.
He's not playing third base. His arm's not good enough.
I want to agree with you so bad on that. And yet video exists from less than a month ago of your friend and mine, Nick Krall, saying, Jonathan India, he came up as a third baseman.
Yes, and Christian Encarnacion Strand played right field in Arizona, and Matt McClain played center field in Arizona. There's a lot of different things that happen during the offseason that don't happen in the regular season, because you're going to go down to Terry Francona and be like, yo, what about Indy at third base? And he's like, ha, that's a good one. I got the lineup. Don't you worry about that there, Nick. You go set up there in the suite. No, I think one of Noelvi Marte or CES will be your opening day first or third baseman, and I would put money on Noelvi Marte being the third baseman, because Terry Francona has said he is a firm believer that you don't know anything about a guy until they've gotten 1,000 major league at-bats. And neither one of them are anywhere near 1,000.
All right. I'm going to bet you right now a bottle of bourbon that Jamer Candelario starts opening day at third base.
At third base?
Over
Noelvi Marte. So
over Noelvi Marte.
So the bet is if it's one or the other. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then if it's Noelvi, we're going to Lexington, brother. And if it's Jamer, well,
it's gotta be
we're going to Lexington, but you're buying. So, and on that note, we've blown past the 1 hour mark, and I am really, really, really going to enjoy that bottle of Pappy you're going to buy me. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Reds. Thanks so much for making Locked On Reds
2045
first listen of every single day. Now go make Locked On MLB your second listen. Our buddy Paul Francis Sullivan, you can call him Sully, has you covered all offseason long with all of the national news for baseball. And he's actually a pretty funny guy too. You're really going to enjoy that show. If you want to check it out, we've made it easy for you. The link is in today's episode description. That's going to do it for Jeff and I. Until next time, when we are in your podcasting feeds, we are going to gather all of the rumors, all of the news. We're going to bring it back right here to keep you locked on Reds every single day. Hannah's going to be so mad
on this one.
No, Hannah's going to love that credit card.
Are involved.
No,
And you're not getting a bottle that's more than $20.
Nope. Watch me. It's going to happen.